Hi everybody, welcome to another Q&A session. Hope you've enjoyed week 2 of STRI's research event 2020. I think the videos this week have covered quite a broad selection of topics, and I'm pleased to say that we're joined today by Mike Rowley, who is from our digital design team, and Dr. Tom Young, who is who you'll have seen or is working with us in research on water management as part of Golf Course 2030. So, guys, do you want to say hello to everyone and just introduce what it is you do in a few words for STRI?
So, hi everyone, it's Tom Young here. I, as Chris said, work very closely on golf courses looking at water management. We're going to have a video based on that in 2 weeks' time, so I won't get into too much detail. But we're very, very closely with the research department on these kind of environmentally friendly research projects.
Hi guys, it's Michael Rowley from STRI. I'm the digital design manager, and we do all the fancy things. So we do all the nice fancy designs and schematics and visuals for STRI, and we work on a whole scheme of jobs.
And hopefully everyone's enjoyed this week's videos that have come through, and kind of with that wide range of topics covering everything from sort of almost like sort of policy, looking into the future, the challenges we're looking to sort of overcome, I guess, in the next 10 plus years. Talking about dealing with some work with the Golf Research Enterprise project, which is looking at very much historical problems that have been with us for decades and will undoubtedly be with us for decades more, but it's helping us to address and informing the decision about how we manage organic matter and water. And with Mike's team, digital design, really interesting sort of developments in new tech for visualizations, for how we communicate in a visual context, sort of the design, the concept, the architecture of different types of golf or football facility, and also how that translates and how that will look at the end of the day. So I found all 4 of those videos really interesting, and all different, covering different aspects of the challenges and some of the solutions we might need to look at. And just as folk are joining the stream, welcome to everybody. Welcome to the Q&A. And please don't be shy. Ask your questions. We're very much looking forward to asking any types of any questions that you guys might have on any aspect of the videos. And heck, well, just ask us a technical question. We've got enough grey cells in the rooms to answer them. So, Tom, do you want to just sort of to start the ball rolling? I mean, water is such an important part of life. I mean, it's not a truism to say no water, no life. In terms of sort of the challenges we're going to be facing now, even, and going into the future, what are your thoughts about that? What do you think are going to be the main issues, and potentially what might we need to start to do to overcome them?
Yeah, so you're right, water's key for everything. Any turf manager will know that. Without water, generally, your turf's not going to survive too long. The biggest things we're finding in the UK now is that it's quite scary how climate change predictions, which I think everyone always thinks are predictions, they are coming true, they have come true. The data is basically showing we're getting warmer on average. We're getting less cold winters, and I think we've seen that, for example, and this year was a particularly bad one for crane fly. These warmer winters, less chance of kind of pest dying, but at the same time, we're getting changes in rainfall, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you get less rainfall all the time. I mean, some of the predictions actually show more rain overall. The problem is you're getting the very long dry spells like we got this year. That was a good 2 months with basically 0 rain across the country, not just in places like the southeast anymore. And then conversely, you're then getting periods of ridiculously heavy rainfall. So we've had throughout of September, August, very heavy rainfall. So the water is falling, it's just falling at different times, it's more spread out. That's exactly what the models predicted. And golf's a really good example of this, of just how vulnerable you can be there's water companies out there, there's people like the Environment Agency, and golf has a bad reputation. We're trying very hard here at STRI to look into this in more detail and educate people that say golf isn't all bad. But there's a lot of places which are now saying entirely reliant on mains water, and a water company could, quite feasibly come along in the next couple of years and say, sorry mate, we're turning off your license, find your own water. So yeah, so a lot, obviously there's the issue of water itself, but then there's all of the design and the research that you've been talking about the last few weeks, Chris. Products, things like wetting agents, seeds, selection, all of these tie in. It's the usual holistic management, and water's a big part of it, but obviously not the only part.
Absolutely, I completely agree with everything you said there. And water is one of the most challenging aspects for us to deal with, because of the nature of when it comes, how it comes, and how we deal with it. And so, and that leads nicely as a segue into Mike and what your guys do in your team, Mike, digital design team. Because, I mean, what do you think are the challenges from your point of view from having to design, conceptualize solutions that are going to have to deal with water management, whether it's landing on a pitch, on a golf course, or dealing with a sort of a new amenity hard surface area, for example?
Yeah, so for us at STRI, it's quite different. So, say 4 or 5 years ago, we were doing them on plans, schematics, and for the more technical people like yourself and Tom, you guys can understand, where water falls and where it goes and how it percolates through the ground. And when we go see clients, it's nice to just put it into a nice visual to show them how it goes from one end of the site to the other in a nice visual video.
Yeah, that's one thing we're looking at more. There's some software we're using quite a lot where it essentially is a big LiDAR kind of smorgasbord of the entire country, and then from that you still can't beat an on-site survey to get that kind of fine detail. Yeah. But what you can do is start to look at sites and go, hang on a minute, this is where the water wants to go.
We can segregate catchment areas and things like that.
Yeah, let's work with it and then incorporate that into the design.
Yeah, and as I said, when it goes to a client, we can visualize that for them in various different ways. Yeah.
And welcome to all those that are joining the stream. Please don't be shy. Ask us your questions. There is no such thing as a silly question, and I ask plenty of silly questions on a daily basis. Just ask Mike and Tom, who we've got here with us on the stream. Right. So fire us all your questions, and we'll do our best to give you a sensible answer as we can do. And so, Mike, coming to sort of over to you again. I mean, the one thing that's always staggered me is going from where we've been dealing with sort of technical information in the two-dimensional space and having to read things like contour maps, having information and quite complex data and conceptual information on the build-up of a sports service, but all of that kind of in 2D. How important do you think the move to a three-dimensional world, things like modeling, virtual reality, and hopefully in the future, augmented reality are going to play a role in the kind of solutions and services that the industry is going to need?
Yeah, so it's important for us because, as I mentioned before, say 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have the capacity or we didn't have the skill set in-house in order to understand how to take schematic plans and lines and data and elevations and turn it into wireframes and make it go into visualization programs and do stages, different stages of development that way. Now we have the capabilities and the personnel and the specialists in-house to be able to do that. And
I think as well, it's not just a nice to have, it's actually a requirement, isn't it? These big projects, for example, some of the biggest stadium projects, you now have to integrate into all of the services that you interact with. Yeah. So there's obviously a big stadium project we're working on at the moment where you have to do a lot of BIM modelling.
Yeah, so for our BIM modelling, we take the architectural base plan, and then we have to collaborate with architects, engineers, and MEP type guys, and we have to collate all our information together into one master model. And obviously, if you make some errors or some mistakes and you move it slightly, when you go to put it back into that model, you could potentially have it over here, or it'll appear somewhere. So we need to understand the 3D realm and the 3D spaces within all those systems.
And I suppose very simply, it's things like pipes crossing pipes, isn't it? You can actually see when someone's going to get in your way.
Exactly.
Big lighting, what they.
Yeah, so we got big, like I was saying, we've got bigger inlets and outlets. If we have pipes crossing, our programs will then tell us we have to move certain elements of the design.
And I think we've got some questions coming in, which is great. So let's start off with our first question. Let's pop that on screen. So Sandra, thank you very much for your question. So Sandra's asked us, do we think the increased use of straight sand top dressings will adversely affect water usage as it seems to be leading to more dry patch? Well, that's an interesting one. I'll take this one on to start, since this is kind of slap bang in my bag, really. I think really top dressing is a crucial maintenance operation. That's without question. All the data and the evidence shows that. The key is understanding why you're doing the top dressing, what you're top dressing onto, and what's the end result you're looking for. So I think the critical thing for me is understanding what's your baseline, where you're coming from. So am I dealing with something where I'm top dressing in particular, not just to maintain levels, keep and dilute organic matter, but really as something to help ensure water movement into the surface, building up a new profile, if you like, because there are inherent issues, which is kind of different if you're just doing sort of routine maintenance top dressing, because that soil profile is working and drainage is working. And so that's just more keeping on top of sort of any fine material or organic matter building up. So I think understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it is important. I think there is a risk, as always, if you're dealing with a profile and it's already very freely draining, straight sand top dressings will make that profile drier, potentially. And so we do have to account for that in our management. And that comes into sensible irrigation practices, use of things like wetting agent surfactant technologies. And it could be that that's what we're actually trying to actively do, because it might be that we're trying to encourage the drier conditions on our golf greens, for example, to help encourage the finer grasses, in particular the fescue through. And if you've got a very sandy construction profile like the links, for example, then absolutely using that sort of straight sand is absolutely spot on. If you've got natural soil surfaces, in reality, you're probably looking at any sandy material is going to give you benefit. So I think you've got to assess it on a case-by-case basis. But we do have to be aware that potentially, if you've already got good drainage or you're building up a profile, we're going to have to adapt our management and maintenance as it goes. And of course, it is inevitably going to be more cost effective than something which has had to be produced, have an organic amendment mixed through it to create a root zone. And so we do have to understand that there are commercial aspects to it. But in reality, top dress, yes, make sure you do it. Make sure you've got budget for it. Keep on with it. But when you do it and you're selecting the appropriate material, make sure that we choose a material which is going to give us the best result for whatever it is we're trying to achieve. Set yourself an objective, monitor your progress, and once you've attained your objective, then reassess and look at how you maintain your management. But be aware, as we change a profile with top dressing, our management has to change with it. So that's a great question, Sandra, to kick us off. Thank you very much for that. And we've got some more questions coming through as well. So the next question is through from Kima. I hope I pronounced that right. And what's been asked is, do you see any future for chemical fungicide use? And what is the alternative to suppress turf diseases? And that's a very timely question at this time of year in the UK, for example, when we're in one of our major disease peak periods, especially in the golf industry. So, Tom, you've got a little bit of experience of this with all the research work you've done over the years. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's obvious that fungicide use or restrictions on fungicide use are increasing, not just for turf, for all industries. And that's been the case for all pesticides easily for the last 30, 40 years. And for good reason, safety reasons, environmental reasons. I think there's always going to be a place for fungicides. We kind of have very close first-hand knowledge here. We get to see fungicides 3, 4, 5 years before they hit the market with a lot of the safety tests and the efficacy tests which we run. And there's still fungicides coming through, but obviously the time and effort it takes to research and develop these fungicides is huge, and at the same time environmental and safety restrictions are going up. So there's clearly going to be less coming out, and I think greenkeepers, sports turf managers are going to have to become much more au fait with careful use, and that's been going on for the easy last 10, 15 years, and that just goes into good quality turf management. And there's a time and place for it, as everything. But at the same time, to kind of prepare yourself for a different world maybe in 20 years' time, when we may look back to what we're doing now and and think, didn't have it easy then, like a lot of people do look back 20 years ago and see what people have then. It's a constantly evolving kind of shifting baseline of what's the norm.
Absolutely, and I think kind of one of the things for me was the new thought process, or not new thought process, but the thought process that was enshrined formally in the Sustainable Use Directive, where we are being told in a legislative context, we need to think more holistically about how we manage our turf. We've got to be more integrated in what we do. It was the first piece of legislation where we're talking about integrated pest management, and that's an approach we should follow. And I think, as good practice, we need to be looking and thinking about how we use the tools in our fingertips, and that covers the full gamut, as you said, Tom. So it's using the plant protection products, fungicides, the herbicides we have, effectively looking to reduce their requirement for them by shepherding and stewarding the turf surfaces better, or optimizing our management so that we have fewer disease pressure, we have less weeds coming into our turf, and using all the tools, whether that be, for example, physical intervention, simple things like switching, like brushing or using dew control products, through to looking to create a hostile environment for our weeds, pests and diseases, such as creating dry environments or more acidic environments. So all of that is really good practice. And I think in the future, we are absolutely going to have to do better at going hand in hand with good cultural practice, sort of good long-term preventative management, and making the best use out of the fungicides and the plant protection products we have available to us. And I think that's going to be the world we're in. I think, Tom, you sort of hit the nail on the head there. If we look back 10, 20, 30 years and what was available, what could be used, we're in a different world, and the awareness and the responsibility of what we need to do as an industry and as a race, as a group of organisms to steward the planet, is going to mean we have to think in a bit more wide terms about how we use all of these products. And so I think it's part of an ongoing conversation, and it's something which isn't going away, and it's something we've got to really wrestle with. And there are guys and gals out there doing fabulous jobs that are kind of able to reduce their inputs and usage of plant protection products by not creating the conditions where our problems will occur. But there is still a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of hard graft from greenkeepers and groundsmen out there. But I think the key thing is to raise awareness, talk the message, help with the education, help provide the advice and the tailored advice for each individual venue, for understanding where they're at, where they're trying to get to, and a process and maintenance program to help get there and adapt it all the time. So that's a really great question. To be fair and to be honest, I could probably talk about that all day and keep on going. And the good news is we're starting to get even more questions coming through. So let's just keep rocking on with the questions. So we've got a big long one here from Pete. So thanks very much for your question, Pete. Your question is, with the last 3 years' weather patterns, so this is feeding into Golf Course 2030 and a little bit of climate-based stuff, I've been putting organic-based top dressings on in March and a sand top dressing in autumn. These are bowling greens, and they've played well in that circumstances. Is there any other chemicals which don't dry out soil, but which don't make grass go crazy? In excessive growth, ideally a liquid or non-granular, as they moan if I put granular down during the playing season. Well, I think the key thing, as always, is balance. So I'm glad, Pete, that you've got yourself a good program for top dressing and top dressing balance. And but I think the key for this sort of situation is making sure that you can manage your water inputs and your soil water effectively, and thinking about things like surfactants and surfactant technologies, wetting agents that will help you manage and buffer your soil water effectively, so that you get the maximum value out of every inch of water you put down. It's giving you the maximum benefit. So I think things like that are really going to be useful. And again, with the nutrition, it's make sure that you're tying your nutrition into your plant demands. Ideally, as you say, liquid approach is probably the best for you in that situation, because most liquid programs, we're looking to, if you like, maintain plant health, plant color, and not create peaks and troughs. And that's really sort of where liquids come absolutely into their forte. So I think your thought process is all going in the right direction. Keep on going and ask any questions. Get advice if you need any specific technical tweaks to your program. And again, a program is a dynamic thing. It has to change with the years, as you've said. It has to change over time. Right, we've got some more questions here. Let's see if there's one for Mike. I think, Mike, you could be out of luck. There seems to be a lot of disease out there. It is November after all, so let's see what we can do. So we've got a question here from John. Got a question here from John Waite, and so John says that anthracnose is becoming more of a problem on greens. John uses soluble straights as a nutrient input, mainly sulfate of ammonia and urea, iron and seaweed also. What else would you advise to negate the onset of this problem? Oh, that's a good one. Tom, have you got not a hospital pass or anything? And John, I do appreciate that's a cracking profile picture there. So a nice rugby-based pun is always good. But hospital pass to Dr. Young. What's your thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, well, it sounds like John's doing a lot of the things he should be doing. The one thing we always find here because we are obviously actively on the trials ground here, do everything you shouldn't do to encourage disease. So anthracnose in particular, what we do to encourage the disease is relatively frequent top dressings, and we give it good wear from our wear machine to kind of really rough up that surface, and we get the sand in there. So I think one thing is to be very careful with the sand top dressings maybe you're putting on, and try and counteract that when you are putting them on with a preventative fungicide program or preventive applications of the iron and your seaweed, just to kind of preempt that kind of caustic nature you can get from the sand of the leaf blade.
And I think kind of, for me, anthracnose, early signs of it is an agronomist's friend really, because it's telling us that there are something out of balance. I mean, anthracnose is out there. It's in the wild. It's absolutely normal, and when it will baseline, its population will keep chuntering away there. And when we have real big problems and outbreaks of it is when something's out of balance, and the grass plant is at a disadvantage, and the anthracnose pathogen is able to get the upper edge. And this time of year is classic. Autumn and winter is a classic anthracnose basal rot time of year, because grass growth slows, so the response of the plant is slower. Its ability to deal with stresses, and abiotic or biotic, is more difficult. And so that's where we need to help boost the plant. And that's where we're looking and trying to identify do the Sherlock Holmes, try and figure out what it is, what may be the underlying causes. So it could be nutritional, but it might not be. Check and just look at how the anthracnose is coming in and seeing, is the anthracnose coming in, for example, in areas, and I've seen some buttes over the past few years with sort of heavy play, wet conditions. You can almost pick out the traffic routes of people walking on and off greens just by where the anthracnose is, and that's just foot traffic. And so in reality, in that situation, it's looking to deal with localized specific aeration to deal with that, to relieve the compaction. So, and if you're seeing the anthracnose coming in from the perimeter in, then absolutely that could be something as simple as your perimeter cut as you're finishing off, just creating that little bit more wear. So you might need to think about compaction relief in those areas. But for me, key, think about fertility, think about making sure the plant's healthy, especially coming into autumn, and then thinking about what other stresses you might be in. Do you have conditions, and is it worse where you have shade? Because photosynthetic stress can be a big problem at this time of year, especially if temperatures aren't too low. The plant's thinking, okay, I could still be doing a bit of growth, but then it's not getting the photo period or the amount of light to sort of really take advantage of that. Look at your compaction. Get a penetrop. Just stick a knife or a probe in the areas where you see the anthracnose. Is it because you've got more compaction there? Get a moisture probe. Check your water balance. Have we got areas wetter and drier areas? Think about wear routes and wear stress going into the green. So all of these things are critical. But undoubtedly, I've got a feeling that anthracnose it's been a good. I'm going to say it's a good year for disease. I'm a bit of a weirdo. I'm a scientist. A good year for disease is we've got loads of it here at Binley because I can play and I can test it. For you guys out there, it's kind of like, no, please don't go crazy disease. But we've seen lots of disease this year. We've seen I've never seen yellow tuff like it. There's great anthracnose, microdochium patch, red thread to in the fistful. So it's going to be a pretty tough autumn and winter season, I think, especially if we don't get sort of significant frost. The weather out there is prime for pathogens at the minute. There's a lot of fruiting fungi. There's going to be a lot of spore production and mycelial. So really keeping on top of all the things, the pressure, the pathogen is critical and key. So being on top of dew management, plant health is really important. So hopefully, John, that answered your question. But I mean, really, it's kind of need to have a good close look at where the anthracnose is coming in. Is it specific to certain areas? Try and figure out why that might be different to the other parts of your greens. So that I think is going to be perhaps one of your challenges to have a little look at. So thank you very much for your question. Pete had come back with a follow-up just to say that his bowling greens down there in Chelmsford in Essex, so are going to be quite dry. East coast, east part of the country in the southeast. So yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely be thinking about surfactant technologies, and I think Sandra there from Bigger has kind of been sort of saying wetting agent and seaweed, and yeah, absolutely. I think these are the kind of things you could be using to help manage your plant stress, help manage you through the tough times. So there's some cracking questions. So Mike, here's a bit of a sort of a question for you. That's it. Get stuck in, lad. Don't be shy. So for me, one of the things I found really interesting for the first time was putting that VR headset on and looking around a stadium or looking around a golf green and being able to move around it. For you, what were your first impressions when you dived into that VR world for the first time?
Made me feel a little bit car sick, I'll be honest with you. But no, it was what it allowed us to do was fabulous. I mean, it allowed us to actually see a scene of a proposed design done, you know, on the VR kit, and you could see what it looked like before it's actually being finished. So, like for example, stadiums are, you know, one thing. If we do a golf course, you know, we could do the proposed layouts and draw them up. But then when we want to visualize that and present that to a client, they can look in there. We've seen this firsthand. They've put the VR headset on. They've looked around and said, "Oh, actually, could you put a bunker in there, and can you take something out here and move that over there?" And for the client, for us to be able to move them and adjust them for the client there and then was good for them. It gave them a better perspective of how to see their course complete.
I suppose as well, and I've said it rather flippantly, it's relatively easy for you to then add in a bunker. I know it's not quite as simple as that, but it sort of says what would it be like, and you can kind of start playing around quite a lot.
Yeah, so give us 30 minutes and we can edit that for you and change it and put that into the design, and your client can see what it'll look like.
And for me, that's a really powerful tool to be able to visualize and conceptualize, and to be able to take a project which is big and complex, like golf construction work or building a new stadium or modifying a stadium, to be able to put yourself inside the drawings and see firsthand what it's going to look like and what the impacts are going to be. It's amazing. I mean, standing inside a stadium, for example, and looking at, because we can model really accurately the sun angles and how the shade is going to go across the stadium, seeing how that shade's going to pan out during the day and as that fast forwards during the year, I mean, that's hugely impressive and gives a really good idea.
Say Leeds United, because I support them. If we pick their stadium up and take it to, say, New Zealand, we have the ability and our location for our 3D model to change the sun tracks. So it'll move the sun track and it'll be in the location that it needs to be in. So we can then do a shade study or a shadow study, and we can show a sun track going over the stadium, and it can be used as a tool to help manage the turf growth.
I suppose, sorry, Chris.
Go on, Tom.
The word impact you use is quite interesting as well, because I think we've seen it at the beginning of stage of projects as well. We've been involved in a lot of projects where some contentious, some not so contentious, but from a planning point of view, you have to demonstrate what impact that particular development will cause on the local environment. And some of these golf courses, for example, will have public rights of way through. And historically, that was done with kind of 2D visualizations. And we're kind of sticking our necks a bit out here, and I don't think it will fully replace those types of way of looking at things, but it will definitely be a key part of the planning process. For things like public consultation, to say, look, come and stand on the new third green, and look, the view's actually been improved since it's done all.
Check sight lines and things, can't we? Yeah. The other good thing as well is if you have, say, problems on your green with trees, say if you just planted a few saplings and then you want to see what it looks like, say, I don't know, 10 or 15 years down the line, we have the ability to make the trees mature, and then we can put a shade track and sun track over the side, and you'll be able to see what it looks like.
And I mean, for me, one of the emergent technologies, which I think is going to be fascinating to see how it pans out, is augmented reality. So, I mean, I would love to go to a site where you've got augmented reality hardware that allows you to, whilst you're on site, look dynamically at what that site's going to look like, or even whilst you're looking at a construction site, for example, to have, through one eye, you're looking at what's out there and the constructor's building it, and then the other eye, you've got the specification, you've got the profile build up, you're actually checking everything as you go and signing it off all digitally, just as you're looking around. And so for me, AR is another important tech. And sort of, what are your thoughts, Mike, about augmented reality? How do you think that's going to fit into the gamut of work that you could be doing in digital design team?
Yeah, so that is one thing that we've, it's a secret that Chris did, but yeah.
I like to give them away.
So that is another service and another thing that we are going to implement at STRI at some point. And as you just pointed out, where you can go to site, so we can physically upload those models to those types of technology, and the model will then go with that client or the consultant. They can go to site, put the lens on or whatever piece of technology it is, and view it before it's built in that location.
And I think the other thing that we've seen people in construction, you can actually physically, if you've got as-built drawings, for example, you could say model drain lines or irrigation lines.
Yeah, you can do that as well.
And it's not really been used in Turkish at the moment, but I think we can see it coming in construction for services. So you can actually see where you've got to dig a hole in the road instead of a bit of trial and error.
You can see where the pipe is in AR, and you can see where the proposed pipe will be on the floor.
I mean, I think that stuff for the future is absolutely very huge potential for not only the conceptualization and design, but also the actual sort of construction operation point of view as well. So I could see that being really strong. Got a few more good questions here. So this is a bit more with an environmental sort of tilt to it. So from Sandra, Bigger. When you design golf courses, do you consider low carbon grasses and carbon footprints overall? I mean, I guess you guys, I mean, Tom, perhaps start with you. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, we've done, I mean, you've had quite a few long discussions on this, Chris. It's carbon modelling is obviously a huge topic, but obviously whenever we design any kind of facility, the environmental credentials are part of what we do anyway, and obviously planning regulations now. Carbon's a strange one because it's not fully kind of integrated into that process now, so there's not kind of an exact benchmark or science of what you should be doing. But I think one thing, there's a lot of studies out there that are showing that golf courses in particular, fantastic carbon sinks. You've got all this great vegetation growing year on year. You obviously got your carbon kind of sources, your mowers, your electricity use, your fertilizer. As a whole, that area of land is absorbing more carbon generally than it emits. The trick is to work that out, which we know, Chris, is not a straightforward task, is it?
It's not. It's often quite tricky because the biology is often the tricky bit. I think some of the other stuff, which I guess is where it's been tackled first, dealing with carbon inputs has often been the first point of call because they are a bit more quantifiable. So, for example, looking at your carbon footprint of your mowers and utility vehicles, and are they electric or are they petrol or are they diesel? What are the carbon emissions, carbon sinks, carbon sources? Looking at low carbon technologies in Clubhouse, for example, reducing waste. I think all of those things have still got a lot of latitude to help overall reduce even further carbon footprints. And I think some of the interesting stuff is carbon capture, carbon storage, carbon reuse. So rather than bringing in new carbon, recycling and reusing carbon, and then allowing that. So things like, for example, are there ways that we can be using sort of digestion type technologies to help sort of carbon that would be lost potentially to site because we've mown it off and are going to either do something with it, compost it, let it back into the system. Can we make some benefit from that? And sort of digestion and closing the loop on a lot of these things is the first stages.
I think I've got a friend who's a proper carbon geek at university. He does this for a living, and he's recently published a paper that's quite interesting. It's the whole subject of carbon is very contentious, and I think politicians, for example, like to make it very simple. And they were studying up in Scotland, and it showed that just by planting trees in some areas actually led to more carbon being released. I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale that just because you say planting trees doesn't actually mean overall you might be having a net impact for the good.
No, absolutely. And in that scenario, for example, if you're putting your trees in a very organic, rich soil, which has then been aerated and drained, you end up losing more carbon in the short term. So again, that's I think Sandra, I think to answer your question, it is on the agenda, and it's something that becomes more and more important when we do deal with design work. And I think it will become more important, and I think it will move up the agenda more. It's probably, if you were to ask me, is it as high a priority as the key things or the more traditional things we'd be thinking about? No, it isn't, if we're brutally honest, because most projects are being sort of thought about from a cost, playing, performance point of view. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be. And I think the more emphasis that we need to put on and can put on environmental stewardship, which is dealing with all aspects of the golf course, from grass species, management techniques, sort of harvesting, capture, reuse, sustainability messages through to biodiversity, net gain, for example. All of these things should be sort of wrapped up as part of our thought process in golf course design. And I think they're getting there. We're getting more prevalent, but there is still some way to go, is how I would sum it up. And some more questions coming through here. Plan, good to see you on the stream. I'm saying, although sport cannot be without injuries, we must continue to look for new ways to reduce the risk of them. How do you measure the safest possible playing conditions for your athletes? That's an interesting one, and that touches on everything that we've got here, talking about materials, talking about design, talking about sort of the planning of it as well. So Tom, Mike, have you got any thoughts on that one? I know I've got a few thoughts, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to have a go first. Another hospital pass.
Go, Mike. Should I let you get first?
So, okay, in terms of, say, design, so
reducing the risk of injuries. And I think for you, is there a way that we can reduce the risk of injury through design in terms of kind of sort of how we might build or plan a sports surface to make that as inherently safe as possible for the players and athletes using it?
Yeah, so before my forehand, so before we start designing or building say a football facility, we'll check the gradients on the existing site, and then we will then do earthworks and model it so it's done to a standardisation and it's done to a regulation.
I suppose within that there's quite a lot of regulations with run-off areas and things like that.
Yeah, so for football, for example, you do a minimum 3 metre margin, and then you keep the exact same gradient of the surface of the playing surface on the margins. For hockey is different. You do different margins for different sports. But yeah, we take those types of things into consideration every time we do a design.
Absolutely, and sort of some of the stuff I've done in the past, where you're physically measuring. So if you look at a lot of where we think about safety at the minute, we're looking at that playing surface and how it's going to react to a player playing on it. And so the two key groups of sort of activities, I guess, are what happens when player impacts the surface and how that energy is dissipated. And then also when we talk about stability and when the players are planting their feet, because we know from looking at players, let alone the biomechanical data, that if a player is comfortable and confident with the surface they're planting their foot on, they will be able to turn faster. They will be able to put more energy loading into their leg and their foot because they have more confidence. So rather than being a bit ginger. So I think in reality, what we do at the moment, looking at impact characteristics and the strength of the turf is really important. I think one of the things, and if you look at individual sports, there has been work done looking at, especially in sort of sports like, I know in Aussie rules football, for example, down in Australia, they've spent quite a lot of time looking at relationships between sort of surface characteristics and injuries, and I know that's happened in other sports. For some of the work I've been doing with sort of in the past, looking at football, for example, part of the problem is trying to come up with sort of straightforward, simple, easy to implement tests, which can be used by not only consultants but also groundsmen and the grounds management team, is finding values where we know where a bit sort of a tighter window and a bit less margin of error, where players may start to get injured. And the problem with that kind of study is you need big data. And I mean, it's not just the kind of thing you can do with one football club. This is the kind of thing you're going to need data going in there for a number of years, from a wide selection of players and surfaces, measuring those all the time. Because once you build up big data, we're going to need to take out the natural fluctuations and variations we see in these things. Because the human, we've got several things adapting. We've got the surface adapting, we've got the player, their physiology, and we've got the player as they adapt to the surface. And so that creates quite a complex set of interactions that trying to unpick can be quite difficult. So often we've gone down the line of quite mechanical ways of looking at this and saying, well, actually, these playing surfaces are, and under these set of conditions, are recognized as being good. And so we would characterize those surfaces, and that forms the baseline, if you like. And as we build up that database at each venue, we can then gauge, well, actually, what's the norm and how the player's feeding back. And then I think looking at that data and actually to be able to monitor and track injury data, for example, as well, and for each individual player. And I think the systems are becoming much better at that. So you can then monitor, because players may well have different internal injury rates. So some players may be more susceptible to certain issues because of their physiology or past injuries. So I think unpicking all of that is quite difficult. But for me, conceptually, if I was to model what would be a good, safe playing surface, absolutely, it should have a good degree of shock absorbency. And if you were to look at playing surfaces, sort of good quality, sort of top flight playing surfaces right now, they're probably at their best in that sort of early part of the season and into early autumn. We've got a good level of sort of cushioning. We're not over soft either, because the problem as well, when the surface gets over soft, you get players that overextend, tear muscles, that kind of thing. And grass cover is critical, because grass cover is the thing that the players' boot interacts with. And one final thing is my parting word, because otherwise I'll keep talking about it for ages, as Tom smiles, knowing exactly I don't want to get my hobby horse. But sort of studs. And there's a reason why the good old-fashioned, call me an old-fashioned man, there's a reason why the good old-fashioned sort of football or rugby stud persisted for so long, is because that kind of shape actually gave you the optimum balance between drier surface and wetter surface. And what it was optimized to do was get into the surface, get into past the crown of the grass plant, into where the roots, the rhizomes, the stolons are. And that's going to give you a lot of tactile strength, a lot of sort of inbuilt strength. Whereas sometimes more modern footwear is great for speed and for certain conditions absolutely gives you great performance. But my perception is that sometimes that optimum window for those particular types of footwear are perhaps slightly narrower than the good old-fashioned football stud. And so sometimes I think that's an interesting thing to look at, is understanding what players are wearing, because that can be quite a significant component of it as well. So, Plum, you've asked another cracking question. I hope you can come back next week and ask another cracker, because that's certainly got the brains whirring. And I think we'll start thinking about sort of drawing to an end, because I'm aware we've been streaming for 48 minutes, and well, I could keep on going all night, but everyone else can't. So we'll have to start wrapping up at some point. But Kima, thank you very much for coming back again with another question. What is the best preventative program for fairy ring? Okay, that's an interesting one. For me, poke and soak is what I would be saying. I love that expression, poke and soak. It's all about preventing wetting, drying cycles and keeping the soil moisture. So I'd be on there with surfactant. I'd be on there with and surfactant, wetting agent technologies, and I'd be going on there throughout the year, if I'm brutally honest, because sometimes that soil conditions can dry out before you know it, and that's already triggered the fungi to start thinking about becoming active and fruiting. And so if we can keep the surface water and water penetration good, prevent hydrophobicity, that's where your poke, aeration, and your soak, irrigation with wetting agent included as part of that, I think is really useful. And then depending on part of the world, there are fungicides available to help control or give some control of fairy ring, but it does depend on species. And that's one of the things that we do know. And it's not that there's an answer out there, but from a fungicidal point of view, sometimes we don't always get the control we'd hoped for with fungicides. So which is why the cultural approach of trying to manage the environment in which the plant and the fungi are living, such that the fungi isn't going to be at a competitive advantage and start to want to grow and fruit. That's really key. And so keep the soil at an optimum moisture. Don't let it get too dry, because as soon as you enter wetting and drying cycles, that's definitely wham bam, thank you ma'am, we're definitely in fairy ring territory there. So yeah, keep it moist, but not too moist. Optimally moist. That's the way. That's the way, I think, with fairy ring. Okay, so I think thank you very much for everyone that's persisted and joined on for the stream. I think it's been fascinating, and it's been a pleasure to have Mike and Tom on board to talk about different aspects of the work that they get involved with, and to ask your guys questions. Please join us for next week's videos, and I'm aware that the streams are available, and they'll be available in perpetuum, so you can go in and have a look and see what it is we were yammering about for nearly an hour, and use that as a resource. And if you do have any questions just for next week, we're back same place, same time, 4 o'clock on a Thursday on Facebook. We'll answer any questions you throw at us. We'll try our best. Might not be the best answer or the sensible answer, but it's the best answer we can give. But we really enjoy interacting with you guys, and all I'm going to say is keep safe, keep happy, keep healthy, keep well, enjoy yourselves, and yeah, look forward to engaging with you all next week. And I'll hand over now to Tom and Mike to say their farewells.
Thanks everyone, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you guys. See you later. Thanks for listening to me, even though I was fairly robotic again.
No, you did a great job, Mike. You did a great job. Thank you very much to you and Tom for joining the stream. It's been a pleasure to have you on board, and I look forward to catching up with everyone next time. So until then, auf Wiedersehen.
See you later.